Under the roof of a university in occupied France, a man challenged the limits of science with a dark purpose. He was not a doctor searching for a cure for a disease, but an architect of death, a craftsman of scientific perversion in the service of Nazi ideology. August Hirt, anatomist and SS officer, was not content with merely studying the human body. With a scalpel in hand and a mind poisoned by hatred, he sought to justify the supposed racial inferiority of the Jews in the cruelest way. In this new military history video, join us as we discover how this atrocious figure of the Third Reich turned his laboratory into a temple of atrocity where he collected skeletons of Hitler's enemies.
Les expérimentations médicales nazies avaient lieu dans tous les camps de concentration, puisque pour les médecins et les chercheurs nazis, c'était une grande chance, entre guillemets, de disposer d'un matériau humain et de ne plus faire les expériences sur des lapins ou sur des rats. C'était plus juste de faire des expériences sur les humains à leurs yeux.
The brutality experienced during World War II was not exclusive to the battlefields or even to the horrific concentration camps. The cruelty of the ruthless Nazi leaders knew no bounds. In this new tour, we delve into the life of August Hirt, a name often forgotten among the macabre doctors of the Third Reich, but also one of the most atrocious. Hirt was born in Mannheim on April 28, 1898. Passionate about the military from his youth, he enlisted in the German army in 1914, eventually fighting against his country's enemies during World War I. In 1916, he was seriously wounded in the face, and the authorities sent him home to recover. However, his role in the conflict did not go unnoticed, as he was awarded the Iron Cross for his performance. Back home, he began his medical studies at the University of Heidelberg and earned his doctorate in 1922. He soon demonstrated his great academic ability, as well as his preference for anatomy, becoming a professor of this science at the University of Greifswald. Between 1925 and 1932, he participated in the design of a microscope for observing living tissue. He conceived and built a prototype with Philipp Ellinger at the University of Düsseldorf, and they patented it in the United States under their names. However, his colleague was Jewish, and with Adolf Hitler's rise to power, he was expelled from his position at the institution. Later, due to the increase in Nazi persecution, he eventually emigrated to England. For his part, August Hirt turned his back on him, renouncing the friendship that had once made them collaborators. In fact, from 1933 on, his CV listed him as the sole designer and builder of the microscope. But that wasn't all. As he approached the new German regime, his career was about to take a major turn.
On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Paul von Hindenburg. In April of the same year, Hirt became a member of the SS, and 4 years later, in May 1937, he joined the Nazi Party. He got married, and the marriage produced a son and a daughter.
By 1940, Hirt had not only raised his family under the ideology of racial hygiene, that is, ensuring the preservation of the Aryan purity of Germans, but he had also achieved numerous scientific breakthroughs. He had published 27 articles on topics such as the nervous system, cancer, the location of bacteria in living tissue, and more. However, starting that year, his full attention would be focused on another task. As a member of the SS, the doctor was part of the German forces that invaded and conquered France. The powerful French country had fallen in just over a month, demonstrating the fearsome effectiveness of the Nazi war machine. But that wasn't all. The Third Reich wanted to demonstrate that its regime was not just about tanks and military strategy. It truly sought to change the global paradigm, and French territory was the gateway to the rest of the world. Thus, the work began to impose National Socialist culture and ideology on the new horizons.
Et dans le même temps, ils ont commencé à se dire qu'ils allaient construire une université très spéciale à Strasbourg. Ils n'allaient pas rouvrir l'université française telle qu'elle avait existé, ils allaient créer une nouvelle université nazie qui avait pour but d'être un phare de l'idéologie nazie vers le monde extérieur, vers le monde occidental. Et on va prendre des professeurs qui sont très intelligents dans leur domaine et en même temps qui sont des vrais nazis.
There was no doubt that August Hirt would be one of these professors. The rise of Nazism had motivated him to enlist in the German forces, and once there, he was one of the greatest defenders of the superiority of the Aryan race. His active participation and stance on the need to end the lives of Jews, Gypsies, and anyone considered inferior fostered the ideas that led to the so-called final solution, the brutal genocide of millions of people. But returning to Hirt's personal history, he was not one of the doctors who experimented inside the concentration and extermination camps. Our protagonist's destiny was different, as it led him to the so-called Rijksuniversiteit, or Reich University, which finally opened its doors in Strasbourg a year after the occupation of France.
Dimanche 23 novembre 1941, 10 heures du matin. 3 ans jour pour jour avant l'arrivée des Alliés, la Rijksuniversiteit, l'université du Reich, ouvre ses portes à Strasbourg. Avec tambours et trompettes, un détachement de la Wehrmacht entre dans l'immense atrium du palais universitaire. Des drapeaux de l'époque du Kaiser côtoient ceux des nouveaux maîtres.
August Hirt was appointed director of the Anatomical Institute. He was passionate about the job he had been called to do, mainly because it allowed him to satisfy his need to learn more about a supposedly inferior race, the Jews. Hirt intended to create a collection of bodies from the Jewish population for future generations, believing they would be completely exterminated. He believed that being Jewish would cause a person's anatomy to change. Therefore, he wanted to research every part of the body, starting with the dimensions of their skulls. Thus, using scientific research as an excuse, he began collecting skeletons from dead prisoners. A request, dated February 1942, and signed by Hirt, requested the skulls of Jewish Soviet commissars. He stated that the university had a large collection of skulls from almost all races and peoples, but only a few Jewish specimens existed. Furthermore, his request specifically targeted Judeo-Bolsheviks, as they represented the prototype of the subhuman specimen, repulsive to the Nazis. According to the doctor, it would be easy to fulfill the request due to the progress of the war on the Eastern Front. However, Hirt soon realized that he had access to a limited number of human remains, far below what he expected. For this reason, he decided to use his rank within the Nazi structure and his closeness to the SS High Command to remedy this problem. He contacted Heinrich Himmler himself, leader of the organization and in charge of the concentration camps. The doctor needed specimens, and these camps were overcrowded with people whose lives were worthless to the Nazis. Fortunately for Hirt, and unfortunately for the victims of the Third Reich, the University of Strasbourg was located near the only prisoner of war center on French soil. Its name was Natzweiler Struthof, and it stood on a mountain range 60 kilometers from the institution.
Le camp de concentration de Natzweiler a été installé sur cette montagne précisément parce qu'un ingénieur SS a trouvé un filon de granit et il s'est dit que c'était une bonne idée de l'exploiter pour les constructions du Grand Reich et notamment pour les monuments que Hitler voulait construire à Nuremberg.
Himmler, another fervent anti-Semite, was moved by August Hirt's interest in studying the inferiority of the Jewish race and ordered that he be helped in any way possible. Thus, the Nazi doctor began to establish contacts with the directors of several concentration camps. Little by little, he managed to get a huge number of prisoners' corpses sent to the institute for study. Such was his interest that Hirt even used the university's funds to finance the Natzweiler Struthof gas chamber. The bodies that came into the hands of the ruthless researcher were no longer those of people who died from brutal treatment by guards or the deplorable conditions in which they lived. He now demanded the murder of healthy people to perfect his study of the anatomy of races. Most of those deported to the French camp were communist political prisoners and enemies of the Reich in the occupied countries. The remaining prisoners were homosexuals and Roma. August Hirt regularly visited the site, having himself prepared the hydrocyanic acid compound used in the chambers. He sought control over the entire process to have the best human specimens for his atrocious collection. Thus, after repeated requests and the meticulousness of his work, in mid-1943, what he had long awaited arrived.
En août 1943, 86 déportés du camp d'Auschwitz arrivent au Struthof. 3 autres sont déjà morts dans le convoi parti de Pologne. Les survivants doivent être mis à mort à Natzweiler. Le 11 août, 29 femmes et 57 hommes meurent intoxiqués à l'acide prussique dans la chambre à gaz du camp. Les cadavres encore chauds sont transportés par camion jusqu'à l'Institut d'anatomie de l'université où on les garde dans la cave.
But that wasn't all. Beyond the deaths of those 86 people, reports claim there was one more victim. It is estimated that the 87th was a famous spy known throughout much of France. This agent was executed using an ancient SS ceremonial rite, in which he was beheaded. As a finale to the brutal process, each of the bodies sent to the doctor was preserved in alcohol to become part of an extensive, personal collection. However, by the time all this happened, the tide of the war had changed, and the foundations of the Third Reich were shaken. It was then that August Hirt understood the fate that awaited him if his ruthless experiments were revealed.
À la fin de la guerre, lorsque les Alliés se sont approchés de Strasbourg, il a senti que le vent tournait et donc il a demandé à ses collaborateurs de découper les corps en morceaux et surtout de supprimer les numéros tatoués sur les bras puisque venant d'Auschwitz, tous les corps étaient tatoués avec un numéro reçu à Auschwitz.
Hirt was right. The end was near. On November 23, 1944, the Free French 2nd Armored Division, under the command of General Leclerc, entered Strasbourg. After expelling the German army, he liberated the city, and several groups of soldiers immediately entered various institutions, looking for evidence and testimony about the occupation. Among many other objectives, they entered the Institute of Anatomy at the Reich University, and in the basement, they encountered horror. They found 16 whole bodies and nearly 200 carefully preserved corpse fragments. After the initial investigations, everything pointed to August Hirt as the main perpetrator of these atrocities. But the Nazi doctor had managed to escape a week before Leclerc and his men arrived in Strasbourg. Nevertheless, the war had taken its toll on the sadistic German researcher. His wife and 15-year-old son were killed in an Allied bombing raid at the same time as his escape. Months later, he decided to surrender to the mayor of Schönenbach, where he was hiding near Freiburg, Germany. Of the 28 medical professors selected to found the university, 3 were classified as war criminals for the experiments they conducted. Everything seemed to indicate that Hirt would face trial for his crimes, but on June 2, 1945, he disappeared again. Some claim he committed suicide that same day, but others believe he vanished among the thousands of refugees then crisscrossing Europe. In fact, as he also held Swiss nationality, he was wanted in that country until 1959 with an immediate arrest warrant. Although he was sentenced to death during the Nazi trials after World War II, he was never found to serve his sentence, and his end is a true mystery. Thus, we come to the end of our video. If you want to continue discovering the most incredible and chilling events, we'll see you in our next installment of Military History.